I think we should go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us, and we are here to share with you the power of voice. My name is Jamie Bilsbach, and I'm the Center Director for Central Mountain Small Business Development Center. And you can reach us on any of those social channels that are on the slide deck. Next slide, Leanne. We offer free confidential consulting, and it's local. We have actually 8 different counselors in our area, and then we have also access to all our state counselors if you need additional like tech support or unique counseling opportunities. We also offer free or low-cost training and access to money and capital, and have been assigned to deal with all the federal funding that has gone through COVID. So we can help you with all those unique opportunities. Next slide. We have storytelling and pivot panels on our website, and it's really worth looking into to see like-minded entrepreneurs and some of the things that they've done in our area. Next slide. And then each of our panelists today, along with all the different attendees from the past Power We Forum series, have written blogs. So if you visit our blog page, you can see all the blogs and kind of reach out to those unique participants as well. Next slide. And to start off, before we begin our adventure today, I wanted to share a few polls to kind of get a feeling how you're feeling during these times. So the first poll question is, during these times of constant change, are you able to tap into your inner voice? And the answers are yes, no, or it depends on the day and circumstance, which seems to be a pretty popular answer. And certainly I would answer it that way myself. So we have about 30 seconds to finish the poll.
This is scientific polling, right?
Yes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. It looks like 67% of us said it just depends on the day and circumstance. I joined that. Others are yes, and there wasn't any but responded no. So next slide. I'd like to share that we have some upcoming training, and so you can see Adrian last week did a pivot panel and how to pivot using lean startups, and we have that. We'll have that available online for you to have on-demand view of that. And then we have Make Your Website Work for You and Cash Flow Essentials. Next slide. And then Leanne Presley, who's also our tech support today, is doing a session on Etsy. And then we have Grow with Google with how to do Google Analytics and also properly position your website for search engines. And then Adrian will share unlocking opportunities for your business using regenerative innovation, and his colleague Manzi Kakar will be joining him on that session. Next slide. And then we have Shopify for beginners, marketing for socially distanced holiday season, and both of those are facilitated by Leanne Presley. And then we have Google critical updates for your website. Next slide. So I'm so excited that we are joining you today, and it's working, yay! And we have Whitney Conner Clapper, who is the Senior Global Activism Manager with Patagonia. And Whitney will have to leave shortly after her presentation. So if you have questions for her, please put them in the chat early on so she's able to respond to those before she has to leave us. And then next, Adrian Reif, who will talk about kind of a short introduction to regenerative business. And then Heather Barron will share hearing your true voice beneath all of the noise. Next slide. So we kind of got out of order on our polling questions, but we'll go ahead and do a poll. Or I guess we won't do a poll. Go ahead, Leanne. We have, I'd like to introduce Heather Barron. We got this. And Heather has been a dear friend. She also married my husband and I as a wedding officiant, but her greatest gift is a life coach. And she offers luminouslife.com. She has an amazing blog about this topic that recently went out. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Heather Barron.
Hello, everyone. Jamie, thank you so much for that sweet introduction. I love that you bring up, a couple of times I've gotten to be a panelist, and that you bring up that I married you too. Every time you say that, I remember that sweet moment. So yes, I am a wedding officiant. I write ceremonies from scratch, and that's my really fun summer gig, because around here we don't have a lot going on other than summer with weddings. But I'm a life coach year-round, and it's an honor to be here today speaking about how to listen to our true voice. I love that 33% said yes, you can hear that, and it wasn't dependent on circumstances. It is more common that 67%, said that it depends on the circumstances, and that's very normal. We have ego, we have personality that can be our knee-jerk reaction, and then we think, why did I say that? Why did I do that? So this, my blog, and what I'm going to talk about is all about how to drop below and hear our true voice. So yes, we have so much noise, which we're going to switch to the next slide, please, Leanne. There's a lot of noise right now. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've definitely noticed there's a lot of noise, and so have all of my clients. We're feeling like we can't hear ourselves think, let alone hear our true voice, with everything going on with the headlines and a pandemic and wildfires and a lot of injustice, unkindness from human to human, human to the planet. There's just so much to be thinking about. And if we're not careful, if you're a caring person, that can become so overwhelming because you want to do something about all of it all at the same time, right? So if you're tuned into your heart at all, this is a problem that many of us can relate to. So with all of this noise that's going on, how do we hear beyond that? And we're going to talk a little bit about a practice that has helped me a lot and that I use a lot with my clients. But first I want to do a little exercise. So I call this a trigger exercise. Go ahead and close your eyes, and I'm just going to read off slogans, headlines, phrases that maybe you're familiar with, or even just the name of different groups. And I want you to notice where you get a trigger, where you're like, oh, not that again, or oh man, I hate that, or oh, I love that. Maybe you're going to have a little bit of both. So we're going to start simple. The Dow plummets. That was a headline from last week. Lockdown looms large again. Impeachment. Antifa. Love is love. White supremacist. Choose life. My body, my choice. Just wear the damn mask. Black lives matter. All lives matter. USA, USA, USA. Make America great again. Dump Trump. So just take a moment. I'm sure that didn't take very long. Triggers happen very quickly. But notice where your triggers are. You probably didn't have to think very hard about this. And the next slide, please, Leanne. Well, we're going to talk today about the pause between stimulus and response, because a trigger is a stimulus. We all have them. They're hard to avoid. If you have a meditation practice, that's a big part of why you might be meditating, is so that you don't react just from your triggers, just from that stimulus. So Viktor Frankl is the one who introduced me to the idea of the space between stimulus and response. So you can see his quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, Viktor Frankl, who survived being in Buchenwald, a concentration camp with the Nazis, he came out to become the father of what's called logotherapy, and it's a form of psychotherapy. And he really focused on man's search for meaning. That was the title of one of his books. And so this space between the stimulus and response, I also call it the power of the pause. And I'm sure most of my clients are tired of hearing me talk about it, but I really do feel like it is the doorway into a way through all that we have to work through as a world, as a country, as a small community, wherever you are. I saw Carbondale on there, so a lot of us are coming from these small communities, and we have to live with our neighbors. We're dependent on each other. So getting to this space between stimulus and response is how we find a way out of no way. So when I was asked, I'm going to give just a couple of examples. And first, actually, I'm going to share something. So I wrote the blog. Very last minute, I was asked to fill the space on the original panel last week. And at first, I thought there was no way. There was no way I had time to write a blog and then be on a webinar. But that was my trigger response. So I know that that is a little bit of a red flag for me to just drop in and listen. So I dropped in and I asked my heart. Lori Benson has helped me really understand this. I asked my heart, am I doing this? And I had a resounding yes. So with that yes, I thought, well, then there's got to be a way for this to happen. And I'm so glad I listened, because it's an honor to be here today. And that's a way to drop into that space, not just stimulus reaction. That's what we often are doing, and that's a lot of what we're seeing right now. And it doesn't matter what side of any argument you're on, that's a lot of what we're seeing. So that space allows us to get into the quiet in between all the shouting and to hear deeper. For me, I have to listen to my heart, because it's the thing I listen to the least. So I actually have to pause to listen for that wisdom. And I invite all of you to practice that too. So that is one example of getting in between the space between stimulus and response. Just an everyday thing. You're asked to do something and you listen beyond that knee-jerk reaction of, there's no way I could do another thing. Then 2 days after I wrote the blog, which flowed very quickly because it was the right thing for me to be doing, RBG passed. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, passed. And I was listening to a podcast about her. And in her earlier days when she was a lawyer, one of her greatest tools that she had all through her life was the power of the pause. And it blew me away, because I'd just written this blog about this. She would be asked a question, usually in a room full of men when she started. And she would pause for an uncomfortably long period of time, to the point that the men would lean in and start trying to help her answer the question, Mrs. Ginsburg. And she would stay quiet, and then she would answer. The brilliance of this is that, one, of course, she had time to get into that space between stimulus and response. The other side of the brilliance was that people leaned in to listen in a world that maybe women didn't have, definitely didn't have as much of a voice. Very petite woman, known to be soft-spoken, but that got them leaning in. And this leaning in is how we start. We get curious about each other. We start to lean in. And this is how we can have conversations with people who seem so diametrically opposed in beliefs to ours. So may I have the next slide, please? Here is the tool that I use to build this practice. Now it takes very short amount of time. The answer I got to say yes to this came in a matter of a split second. As soon as I said, heart, heart, will you please tell me what I need to do? I had the answer right away. So this is the practice that I started a long time ago, and it's one that I'm going to share with you all. And if nothing else, may this moment, because we're going to do just a quick little deep breathing and pausing, may you feel refreshed in that for your day. So I start, close my eyes if I can. If you're driving, I don't recommend that. And mentally saying, I am safe to pause and listen. I know this may sound really obvious, but I am learning it is one of the most important things, at least with my female clients, to say, I am safe to pause. I'm safe. I don't have to do. And it feels like we have so much. Again, that noise. So letting our nervous system know, letting our brain know, our lizard brain know, I'm safe to pause. I don't have to move right now, is very helpful. I'm safe to pause. I take 3 deep breaths, and I invite each of you to take a breath with each of these things that I say. Take a nice deep inhale, and I say to myself, I belong here. I belong here in this moment, in this time, with exactly what is mine to do. Take another deep breath. I am ready. I am ready for what is mine to do. I am ready for this time. And I take a 3rd deep breath. I tell myself, I remind myself, I am not alone. There are so many all over the planet expressing life, asking the same questions I'm asking, working through the same challenges I'm working through. I'm also not alone because I've learned I have this still small voice, my true voice, always present, always guiding me to take the next step. And it's never shouting at me. It's never coming from the noise. It doesn't have to. Just like RBG, it whispers because it just knows that it's true. So I have to get quiet to hear that. This usually helps me get back to a state of what I call right mind, not so crazy and reactive. Then I continue to allow my breath to flow naturally. So I invite you to do that. But keep your eyes closed if you'd like. And I ask myself, what am I feeling right now? Usually from this dropped in space, I've learned to identify feelings pretty quickly. Rage, terror, sorrow, heartbroken. And I'm able just to notice that disappointment, frustration. Some feelings are stronger than others, but I can notice what is happening. And then if you have your eyes open, you'll notice I already have my hands over my heart, which is a place that I have them regularly these days. But for this next step, I place my hands on my heart if they're not already there. And I ask a few questions. What deeper wisdom do you have for me, heart? And I'm going to walk through these questions just due to time, but I give time to hear the answer. Other questions I ask, what do you have for me to know about what I'm feeling right now, about this sorrow, about this frustration or anger? Do I need to take action based on what I'm feeling? Or do I just need to be still with this feeling it all the way until it passes? And that has helped save me a lot of time and energy with making choices out of a knee-jerk reaction and then doing something and causing more damage to what I'm trying to help, or just causing me to have to do damage control with apologies and things like that. So this helps me to see what is mine. And I do feel like that is probably the most important question, which I didn't put on the slide, but to ask the question, is this mine? Right now, because of all the noise and the constant interaction with social media and everything that is going on, we can really feel like there's a lot that we have to take on, but we end up taking on false responsibility, which takes our energy, it takes our peace, it takes our ability to be responsive rather than reactionary. So the question, is this mine, is also a question I ask. And often at this point, I've been practicing this for so long, that may be the only question I ask in that series. The next step, I just ask, what is my next right action? What is my next right step? And I've been surprised by what I hear. Sometimes it's reach out and call somebody. Sometimes it's as simple as make some tea, shut up, and sit down. It can be a whole series of things. It can be write a letter to your congressman. It can be, you know, whatever. And the last step, I take 3 more deep breaths, which I'm going to invite us to close our eyes and take 3 more deep breaths. And then I open my eyes. And the reason for those 3 deep breaths, if you do yoga at all, you know Shavasana is the most important pose, but it's also the one people try to skip at the end because, well, they need to move on to the next thing. That creates a space in itself for me to hear anything maybe I have missed. So this is the practice that I use. And Leanne, will you forward to the next slide, please? On the last slide, we don't need to go back to it, but on the last slide, there was a little thing that said like breathe, think, something, react. And I actually like to use the word, so you'll see in that bottom corner, thank you, Leanne, that little glimpse. I actually like to use the words breathe, drop in, listen, respond. If I find myself reacting to anything, I realize that there's probably a little bit deeper listening I need to do. And that makes it more that I'm responding, which makes me able to respond. And that is my true responsibility. So the way out of no way is this space between stimulus and response for me, the power of the pause, getting up on that bridge, looking out over the maze of how we have no idea even where we're going, let alone how to get there right now. And that helps me to find what I haven't been able to see before. So I hope this has helped you all. And I thank you so much. And we can move to the next slide, which has my resources. Oh, thank you, Christine. I'm so glad you enjoyed that. She says, beautiful process. It is a beautiful process. It's powerful, and you have it right at your fingertips and right where your breath is, so you can practice that. These are just a few tools that have helped me. Some books that have been very helpful in finding my own voice. When Women Were Birds is by Terry Tempest Williams. I just read that again. Phenomenal, especially for women, about voice in general. It's a beautiful, beautifully written piece. Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, which that's my typo. It should be Palmer. Anything on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life. Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown helps us realize that we don't have to be reactionary to be looking like we're in it, you know, with everybody right now, and to catch ourselves needing to do that. So, oh, and the one thing on here I want to make sure to point out, I use Enneagram. It's a personality typing tool, for lack of a better way to phrase it. I'm not a big fan of personality typing in general, but this has been a very, very powerful tool in working with my clients. So I just wanted to share that. Helps us get on to the ways that we react that we may have blinders to. And so that's why it's helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. It's always good to hear from you. And I love that you start off these sessions when you participate in such a holistic way. So thank you. And I would like to say that I actually have hired Heather to help me during these difficult times. We help so many small businesses, and it just kills my heart that I can't help every one of them. And so Heather's been helping me on that journey. So thank you. We have our next poll. I think I saw it. and then it disappeared before we introduced Whitney. It's, have you ever shared your voice, personal or business, for social activism? Yes, no, I thought of it, but the consequences were too kind of severe. I certainly have experienced that myself. So we'll give this a few more seconds. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share. And it looks like almost everybody is either that they have, yes, 92%, or they thought about it, 8%. So with our next guest, so next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Whitney Conner Clapper, and I'm so excited that she was able to join us, especially after our tech issues last week. She's very busy with Patagonia and carved out some time to rejoin us today. And Whitney will share her thoughts about speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes. And I know that I certainly have had a voice that has shook really since COVID happened. So I'm very excited to hear her presentation. Please help me welcome Whitney Conner Clapper.
Thank you, Jamie. And can I get a thumbs up maybe from Heather? Can you hear me okay? Okay, Adrian, thank you. Great. And a thumbs up just because why not? Well, thank you all. And thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Heather, for setting the scene perfectly. You may have thought that we worked on our presentations together. We did not, but there will definitely be some similarities there. So let's jump into it. As Jamie mentioned, I'm here to speak to you all today more about how to use your voice. And I have to laugh that, Jamie, you asked me to say that, because my self-critic, of course, internally is like, I'm not the expert on that. But as I went back through some of the different ways I've used my voice, one, I realized I can't help but using my voice. I've tried to shut my voice up. It doesn't work for me. And so I'm just going to share some examples of how I've used my voice. And let's jump into it. So with that, let's go to the next slide, because this is, of course, where we are in current present day. There's a lot of engagement. There's a lot of stimulus, as Heather said. And I feel like voices are flowing freely, whether they are what we want to hear and what we agree with or not. There's a lot of noise out there. But I feel like one thing we need to really acknowledge and be very clear on before we use our voice is that there's this massive unlock to using the voice. And that really is, let's go to the next slide. That really is the fact that before we can really use voice effectively, we have to actually listen, as Heather was talking about. So from Rumi, there is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. And so with that, I'm going to get into more of a personal story and journey I've had as the environmental activism marketing manager for Patagonia. And we can go to the next slide for that. Thanks, Leanne. So I'm going to introduce you to a dear friend of mine. This is Bernadette Dementev. And if anyone saw Patagonia's recent film that we just launched, Public Trust, Bernadette was a key voice in that film. She is a Gwich'in native. She's a mother, grandmother, daughter, woman, warrior, protector of the Arctic. I mean, so many accolades for this woman. She not only works her life away to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, she works really to protect that place because it is where her food source comes from. So she is working constantly to protect that refuge because it's the birthing ground of the porcupine caribou herd. And this is a herd that migrates all throughout both the north and south of the Arctic Refuge, through Alaska into Canada, up and down. And the refuge is the other name for this refuge is the birthing ground, because that is essentially where the caribou go to have their babies. So where Trump currently is trying to drill is where Bernadette has spent her life really trying to protect. So I have worked with Bernadette for years because Patagonia has been involved in Arctic work for decades, for the past 20 plus years. So as part of that work, I was invited to attend a Gwich'in gathering in Fairbanks, Alaska a few years ago. If we go to the next slide, please. This is a gathering that happens annually. However, the one I attended was the first time that the entire Gwich'in nation was brought together, which means it was the first time in years that the Canadian side as well as the Alaska side came together. And if you think about what this looked like for them, think about left and right, think about Republican and Democrat in this situation, think about kind of opposing forces. This is the first time the entire nation was brought together, and you had you had a lot of opposition. I could feel it when I walked into the room. I could feel the tension. I could feel really the challenge, both sides being challenged because they had not been in the same room in a long time. However, they were willing to come together for the greater good of their land, of their people, of their life source, of their lifestyle. The Gwich'in are one of the last remaining tribes to really fully be colonized, and they essentially live off the caribou, and they absolutely need the refuge to be protected in order to maintain their lifestyle and way of life. And so this is me speaking with one of the elders at the gathering. And let's go to the next slide. So right now, the current administration, is working to really drill more into the refuge, but extracting the resources on the sacred land is irreparable. And to do so without the permission of the sovereign nation, without permission of many of the Gwich'in, it's a human rights violation. And so this is a lot of the work that Patagonia is involved with, as well as, of course, Bernadette. So harm to the land is harm to the Gwich'in people. Nature is their grocery store. The caribou, this is their food. It's their medicine cabinet, teacher, healer, so on and so forth, like outdoors is for so many of us. Traditional foods like caribou, moose, fish, berries, I mean, all of what you find in Arctic refuge is their source of life. Whereas you go to the grocery store, you buy milk, you buy a bag of frozen vegetables. A frozen bag of vegetables alone can cost up to $20. So it's just not sustainable if they cannot live off the land. So, and then you add this kind of broader sense of what you're feeling in the room of this opposition of these two. And so there's this need to really come together for their greater nation. There's this need to take care of the land, and there's this rift. So it was really an interesting experience. Let's go to the next slide. Why I'm really sharing this example and story with you all is because I have never witnessed just being an observer and watching people that are in conflict, palpable conflict, be able to sit and listen to one another. Watching Bernadette speak with clear opposition in the back, even though people may not have agreed with Bernadette, they were quiet. They weren't on their phones. They weren't scribbling notes. They weren't talking to each other. They were quiet, and they absolutely listened. And so Bernadette would speak, and then someone from the other side would speak. And there was clearly this choice to slow down, to pull in beside one another, and to really put aside whatever past conflicts had been there in order to meet in the middle for the greater good of the nation, of the lands, of the caribou, and so on. And it was one of those things where I was completely blown away by it, because it just isn't happening in our world. Can you imagine if Biden were to actually listen to Trump and Trump to Biden? Like, what would that look like if there was actually just a pure listening? How different things could be politically, let alone adding in any other conflict that's out there right now. And so here I was an observer to this sense of two sides coming together to be one again. And it's something that I will take with me forever and ever because of some of the things that you were talking about, Heather, in your comments, just the fact that there is so much stimulus out there. Watching resolution happen purely because people chose to listen is incredible. And that's what I saw at this gathering. And apparently the gathering was so powerful, not only for me, but even more so for the Gwich'in, that if we go to the next slide, this was a post that Bernadette shared about the gathering recently, even though the gathering was back in 2017. So one of the proudest moments I had while working, this was November 2017, sharing the truth, no matter how much it hurt, with my leaders and elders and receiving their love and support. It's because of them I never give up, Gwich'in strong. So this was one of the final scenes of the gathering where I think that I don't even know how long they were standing here. I had come and gone a few times by this point because clearly I didn't need to be a part of this as an outlier to the conversation. So I wanted to give them this space, but this was the final scene where both sides, what was left of kind of both sides, had come together and really decided to put away the past and to make peace and move forward. And so again, sharing that with you, because before we can really even get into voice, there has to be this grounded sense of really wanting to listen in order to really truly hear what we then need to say. So if we go to the next slide. I saw this, from, I think it's Culture Strike, as an artist coalition. And they put this out there, and I just thought this is like the recipe for life, right? Not only to listen, but to love, listen, and learn. I mean, if that can be the formula for any sort of conversation moving forward, wow. I mean, it would be very dynamic. So if we go to the next slide, Heather kind of brought this up, but recognizing that this is essentially why I use my voice and how my voice often sounds when I'm unsure of it, but I know I need to speak the truth. It may shake. So from this deep space of listening, sharing the truth, even if it feels hard to speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. So the first time I saw this, it was from a human rights activist, Maggie Kuhn. And I jokingly thought that this should just be my next tattoo because it was so profound for me, and it completely silenced any of the anxiety that I had around using my voice. So I had to throw this in here because it is somewhat arresting to me even now. So I'm going to tell you briefly just my story of how I've become somewhat skilled, depends on the day, at using my voice. So let's go to the next slide. So, had to throw in the classic, like, little kid family pick, but I threw this in because I really grew up in a community that was kind of a juxtaposition. I had kind of inside the house where my father was an English professor and oftentimes would write notes to the higher ups and the leaders of the school where he taught on behalf of kids at school. And quite often he would stand up for the students, and he would stand up for what he felt was right when other faculty members weren't quite seeing that. And so I saw him kind of using his voice through the written word as an example. I also had my mom, who quite oftentimes, we grew up in the St. Louis area. There was a lot of segregation, and we quite often were the white family among Black families. We were the first family to really recycle. We were always kind of that family who didn't quite fit the norms and definitely didn't fit the small Midwest kind of mentality of the community that we grew up with. I also grew up in a Christian community where I learned how to edit my voice in order really to survive, which meant that I kept my voice positive. I kept emotions positive. I always was happy. I always tried to tell jokes. I found that when I deviated from positiveness and happy, that quite often that's when I would get in trouble, or that's when harm would come. And so I stuck to really trying to always be glass half full, even when it wasn't. So I learned how to edit my voice really for survival. And quite often that backfired on me. And it took me years and years of truly trying to figure out what had happened in order to really be effective with my voice. And it's really comes back to these moments where I learned how to use my voice for a certain need, but that need has now evolved. And so I'm consistently trying to figure out how best to use my voice, even if it's not a happy or positive or healing type of mention. So with that, let's go to the next slide, because this is really how I've evolved my voice, whether it's business, whether it's relationship, whether it's with my child. My voice is really synonymous with truth, be it positive, negative, it's synonymous with truth. Using my voice means standing up for justice. And for people to truly hear my voice, it must come from a heart space, not my head. It backfires when it's from my head. So it wasn't really until I entered the corporate world that I really began to comprehend how much my voice mattered, and whether I personally wanted to speak or not, I found myself speaking. And not only that whether my voice mattered or not, but that my heart had to be engaged and for people to truly hear me. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Because I've definitely had countless times throughout my career where I have texted or called Heather and said, well, I'm probably going to get fired tomorrow, and then launched into what I've just done, how I've just shown up, what I've just said to VPs, to CEOs, to people in quote unquote power. And quite often the response has been the complete opposite. And instead of being fired, quite often I've been surprised with a bonus. I've been promoted. I've been asked to take over other bodies of work that normally probably would not have happened. And so I shouldn't be surprised by any of this, because again, when I choose to use my voice for justice and for truth, of course, the world responds. So recently, I was on a small team with Patagonia, and we worked on an acknowledgement for Patagonia. And basically, it was an acknowledgement of our shortcomings, which is rare for us to put something out like this, but an acknowledgement really of our shortcomings to take a stand for racial justice. And we are a company that quite often, I mean, the people that shop and wear Patagonia look like me. We quite often are more of a privileged brand. We are expensive, so not everyone can afford Patagonia. And quite often we are really good at kind of raising our voice around environmental issues and around supply chain needs and around a lot. However, when it comes to racial justice, we weren't taking the steps that a lot of us thought we needed to at least take. And so this acknowledgement was definitely a gamble for us to do, especially as colleagues, typically at the mid-level management position. It was a gamble. We didn't know how the owners were going to respond. We didn't know how our VPs were going to respond. But it was something that, again, it just felt right for us to do, and for us to do not only for our internal colleagues, but also to put it out into the world, primarily because a lot of people see Patagonia, at least in the outdoor industry, as a leader. And so we wanted to call out the fact that we weren't leading in this situation, and that we not only weren't leading, but that we have a lot of work to do to really become a more equitable and inclusive company. And quite often we don't put things like that out. We wait until we've conquered something to release anything publicly. So this was a big departure from kind of normal practices. And so we went about this acknowledgement very carefully. When I say we, it was probably 5 or 6 white colleagues, and then majority of the authors were our colleagues of color. And so we worked together on this. And it was one of those that the first couple of drafts were rough. It was like a healing effort to really put everything out that we felt. But we slowly refined it and really got to the pure essence of what we were really trying to communicate. And it really felt like each draft, we kind of carved away more and more ego to the place where we were really just listening and writing down whatever the heart directed. And so as a result, it was shared publicly a couple weeks ago. And for the most part, VPs completely were 100% aligned. The owners of the company were completely aligned. And not only were they aligned, they actually edited part of it because they wanted to add in more examples of where they had failed in the past. And so they were completely not only aligned, but in agreement, full stop, on the fact that we weren't doing enough. And it was one of those things that we now have in place. The right people and actions are being taken internally and externally to really do more around this place of racial justice. And so there are many other examples, but this was one of the more recent ones where it felt like I was going maybe against the grain from my boss, from my VP, from CEOs, from owners, when in fact it was absolutely something that needed to be done. And that's what I had really felt in my heart. And so that's why I was a part of this. And that again is, let's go to maybe the next slide. That again is why it's so important, one, to listen, and then to speak your mind, even if your voice shakes, which have to add this in. Heather sent this to me and I was like, this is where we need to add in. The last slide needs to be good old Ruth Bader Ginsburg with this quote, because it just, you can never see this enough. So while I could go on and on and on, I'll end with what we already know, right? The world is on fire. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of stimulus, but really it's going to be through our pause for us to figure out how to use our voice and to choose to either fuel the flames or really to smother the embers. So amidst the chaos, I'm doing my best to pause. I really appreciated, Heather, your intro and your guidance. I need like a little pocket, Heather, to pull out and to help me remember to take the deep breaths with everything I do, because there is a lot and it's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of the day-to-day. But really, I just think we're going to be able to move mountains with that pause. And then from that pause, our voice that then comes next. So with that, I will say thank you to Jamie. Thank you to you all. And I think there's one more slide, maybe of resources. Is that right, Leanne? Yeah. So here's just a few resources. I mean, this is an ounce of the resources I would normally share with you all, but anti-racism resources, always really good. This is a Google Doc where there is a ton of other content in there, from books to read, to podcasts to listen to articles to check out. So definitely something worth looking at. A reading list on allyship, intersectional environmentalism. This was started by a past colleague at Patagonia, Leah Thomas, who essentially has helped kind of redefine, in some cases, environmentalism and the need to really bring people into the conversation. So people and environment, so intersectional environmentalism. There's another article, Racism Derails Our Attempts to Fight the Climate Crisis. These are articles that we're quite often tracking with Patagonia. Some films that I added in for a variety of reasons. District 15 is a current film, well, a film that we've launched in January. It is a film that really looks at the frontline community in Los Angeles, a frontline community that is fighting big oil, essentially for their lives. And it's similar in some cases to the Arctic film that Bernadette is in, where again, it's this fight against kind of big oil for life. So both two films to check out there. And then Public Trust trailer, we just launched this film on Friday. So you can actually see the full film as well now on YouTube. And then, of course, elections, we all know there's a lot going on this, and now that we're almost in October, it feels like it's only going to get more and more crazy. So if you haven't already, there's a link to write postcards to eligible voters. And then there's also, if you don't feel like writing, I know my husband doesn't like his penmanship, so you can do other things, like you can make calls, you can send text, you can do all sorts of things for some deeper engagement with eligible voters. So with that, I will say thank you and good luck today.
Whitney, thank you so much. And I received your blog, and it actually brought tears to my eyes. So Whitney shared the Patagonia story today, but if you go back and read her blog, you will see her personal journey. And it just was, it came from the heart, you could tell, but it really touched me. So thank you, Whitney, for that as well. And my mantra, because I really believe love is all there is, but it's really hard to believe that with all this chaos and noise. So I kind of hide in my house a lot. But the big thing that I do is stop, wait, and listen. That's my mantra. So very similar to yours and to Heather's. And thank you so much. And now we have the first man ever at the Power of We Women's Entrepreneurs Forum Series. So I had a chance to hear Adrian's regenerative business process with the West Slope Startup Week. And I listened to he and Nancy, and it was just profound to me, because I've had all of these things in my head because of the chaos. Like, we have to do more and we have to evolve as businesses. And here they were explaining these different processes. And I reached out to Adrian not too long after that. And I said, you have to speak. Didn't really understand all of what you were talking about, but I know that you have to present. And so Adrian agreed to be in this series, but also do 2 other webinars for us, the Lean Startup and Pivot Process, and then an in-depth dive into regenerative innovation. But before I bring him on, I'm going to launch a poll that says, have you ever used your business to build a better world, social or environmental? So it's kind of taking a lot of Whitney's work, but taking that even farther into a business model that's really interconnected. So they, I hope it's launching. Do you guys see the poll? The answer, no?
Not yet. There it is.
Okay, there it is. All right. So the question is yes, no, or I'm thinking about it. And so if you could please share that. And in the meantime, I know Whitney has to leave us soon. So if you have any urgent questions to ask Whitney, please share that in the chat as well. And Leanne, perhaps you could prompt me if you see more of those. Leanne's doing our behind the scenes tech. And I guess I'm going to end polling because it's resoundingly yes. And so, Adrian, you have a good audience to present to. And I'd just like to say that Adrian's work, besides being a very successful entrepreneur, he also is the, I have to read this, Chief Strategy Officer. And he works with tactical execution on marketing, branding, operations, and capital raising. So I'm really excited to hear Adrian, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm super excited to be here, and just want to honor Heather and Whitney and able to hear your wonderful, beautiful stories today and the wisdom that you're sharing with us. So thanks for that. Leanne, you want to go to the next slide?
Yep, I will. And I'll say there are no questions that I can see for Whitney at this point. So thank you.
So one of the things I'm doing, I've been an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur for the last decade. And I started my first company when I was 25, organic peanut butter company, and slowly grew that over time. And through that business, we tried to do some cool things. We were 300% carbon neutral. We helped feed children with malnutrition in Guatemala and Haiti. And we hired people with disabilities in part of our supply chain and tried to source as ethically and responsibly as possible. And so over that time, I came across all the challenges that businesses face in trying to do things responsibly and holistically. And after stepping away from that business, I really started to devote myself to thinking about how can we train and educate business owners, entrepreneurs, large companies, how to think regeneratively, because our future depends on it, I believe, and I believe that business is will be one of the driving forces for building a better world. And yet we don't have a process to do this. And at the same time, we can go to the next slide, Leanne. I believe the future success of your business depends on it, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a small business, you're a large business. At any given point in time, there are basically 3 horizons. And if you click to the next slide, Leanne, right now we're somewhere in this first horizon, and it's getting ready to go downhill and fast if it hasn't already. And there's another horizon coming, the second horizon, that's going to come up, and it's going to be a little different than the now. But ultimately, what I believe is that business owners, if we want our business to survive and thrive, we have to be thinking about the third horizon. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, you see pockets of future that are embedded in the present that will eventually become the norm of what our world looks like. We can go to the next slide. We're going to click play on this. This is a time-lapse video of Lake Mead from 1984 to 2016. And we can see kind of the fluctuation of the water, a little more dropping down. And that's 84 to 2016. We can go ahead and close out of that. So we saw that. We saw a tangible drop in water levels. And this is just one body of water. This is one signal to us that the future is going to look very, very different than the now and even the past. Go to the next slide, Leanne, please. So we have these things happening all over the world. We have water disappearing. We have oceans warming. We have wealth disparities increasing. We have communities deteriorating and falling apart in many ways. We have carbon going into the atmosphere. And so we know that the future, all of these conditions are going to give us a future that's far more volatile, far more uncertain, far more complex, and far more ambiguous. And to top it off, we have protests and we have racial injustice that is coming to the forefront. We have climate change. We have a pandemic hitting the entire world. And so if this notion of VUCA isn't this year, I don't know what it is. And so what do we do about this? What do we do as business owners, business leaders, entrepreneurs? We'll go to the next slide. I think really the only question we can ask ourselves, I'll go back to the regenerate slide, is not only just how do we sustain where we're at, or how do we fix things a little bit, but how do we actually recreate and improve things over time? And that's the definition of to regenerate. How can we actually make something better? This is socially, ecologically, across the board. How do we think about how we use our our skills, our gifts, our talents, and our businesses to make a better world. Go to the next slide. So one of the questions that I ask myself is, in the world of business, we've been taught for so long that we're a tree and we need to grow ourselves as tall as possible by ourselves so that we can conquer and control everything. But if you look at a forest ecosystem, actually the health of any individual tree is dependent on the health of the ecosystem around it. And so I believe that we're shifting from a mindset of me, I, growing as tall and big as possible and being better than everyone else, to thinking about how do I nourish the ecosystem around me, and in return, I get to benefit from that as well. And this is a pretty big mindset shift, I think, from our historic capitalistic tendencies, but it's certainly one that is going to prove itself going forward as we think about living on a constrained planet where we all can't be the tallest trees that control everything. We have to think about how we interact and work with and are dependent on the entire ecosystem that we're in. We can go to the next slide. So regenerative innovation, regenerative business, it's something I'm deeply passionate about, but what does it actually look like? And there's an example I want to share from an organization in Brazil called Brazil Child Health, founded in the early 1990s by a pediatrician who was working in a hospital like a typical physician, seeing kids from the slums come into her office and giving them medicine, saying, all right, here's your medicine, go back home. She started to notice a pattern that each of these kids would come back 2 weeks later, 2 months later, again and again and again. And to hit on the theme of our pause, theme that we've been going through without the day-to-day, this physician, Vera Cordera, paused and said, wait, am I actually helping solve the problem, or am I actually feeding the problem? And so what she did was think about relationships to the people that were coming into her office, to the kids that were coming in her office, and started to think about, how are these kids actually living? How are they actually getting along in the world? And what she realized is that there were several components of their lives that were significant predictors of them coming back into her office with their illness to get another thing of medicine. And she realized that the sanitation in their home was a critical piece of that. Their parents' income was a critical piece of that. Whether the kid was in school or not was a critical piece of that. And actually whether or not they had the proper documents to be citizens of Brazil, and whether or not they were documented or not were big parts of that. And so once she realized this and mapped the system, mapped the network around these children, she identified a way to potentially go in and treat the root cause of what she was seeing, not the symptom. She set up Child Health Brazil and started treating all different areas. So when a child came into her office, she didn't say, here's medicine. Of course, they still got the medicine because they were sick. But she said, okay, I'm going to go into your home. We're going to bring in some people to improve the running water situation. We're going to patch the hole in the roof. We're going to look for issues where sanitation is a problem. We're going to get your parents job training. We are going to help them nationalize and get the proper documentation so that they can get jobs. And we're going to track the kids' progress in school over time and see if they're staying involved in going to school. So Child Health Brazil started doing all of these things, and they reduced the recidivism rate, meaning the children coming into her office with the same sickness for the same medicine, by 80% over the course of a decade. And I think this is a beautiful, let's go to the next slide, Leanne. So we use this as a kind of a fundamental approach for regenerative business and regenerative innovation, because we realize that as business owners, the more we can solve a root cause, the more successful we can be, right? Like I can either keep giving the kid this medicine and having them come into my office and leave and come back, but that was costing the healthcare system tens of millions of dollars. And now through this regenerative approach of mapping the system that a kid lives in a slum in Brazil, they were able to reduce the cost for the healthcare system by tens of millions of dollars just in doing this mapping system. And so one of the tools that my colleague Monty and I teach is called network mapping. Really simple, but you think about putting yourself in the middle as an entrepreneur or business owner, and then drawing lines out to the different nodes that you interact with on a daily basis. This could be your clients or your customers. This could be your supply chain. This could be your investors. This could be your marketing partners. You exist in this rich ecosystem that relies on you and that you rely on it. But by mapping these systems and trying to understand, let's say we're drawing a line here from the center triangle out to one of the circles, and that circle is a child. And so I was actually doing this with a business owner a few weeks ago who runs a online platform that provides math lessons for teachers. And basically a teacher can go in there and say, I want algebra lessons. And in under 2 minutes, they can get a whole thing of worksheets for their students. And so if you are here, that's the software platform. We draw a line out to a circle, and that's the teacher, which is one of their customers. We start to look at all the different ways that teachers interact with the world. And so on a daily basis, they're interacting with students, they're interacting with teachers' unions, they're interacting with their school district, they're interacting with students, and then you go and map out from students, you see that students are interacting with families and communities and caseworkers in many instances in low-income communities. And we looked at all the different ways that the teachers could actually impact their students differently, and also the ways that the software platform can impact those teachers. At the end of the session, one of the things we realized is that the teachers weren't a part of this process of creating the software. And we realized that if we allowed them to come in once a year for a week and have a session with the owner of the software company, the teachers would bring not only more insight about what their students are interested in and learning, the teachers would feel empowered and a part of the process, whereas in a classroom, they almost feel disempowered a lot of the time. So let's invite the teachers in to help them actually create the software that they get to use in their classroom. And we realized that by doing this, we can not only build a better product, but we can empower the customers of that software platform to do a much better job and help this business build the ecosystem around it, strengthen and make the ecosystem around it much, much healthier. And in turn, those teachers could go out and do a much better job empowering and educating their students in the classroom. So that's a small example of network mapping and thinking about the relationships between all the parts in the network. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm gonna leave you with this, and this is just a quick overview of regenerative innovation, but there are 10 mindset shifts that we've kind of distilled down to how to start thinking about this at a individual entrepreneur and business level to think about how to build a regenerative business that's looking out 5, 10, 20 years down the road and is able to build a better, more regenerative world. So we said, okay, what if instead of just solely focusing on a product or a service, that we actually became purpose-centric businesses, meaning the purpose of your business is the sole driver, not I'm going to sell this widget for as much money as possible, but I'm going to serve my customer in the best way possible. I'm going to help uplift people. I'm going to help plant trees. Whatever that purpose is becomes the driver of the business model, not the widget. And the second is, what if instead of aiming for a maximum profit, we aimed for regenerative value? So back to the network mapping. What if we actually existed to serve strengthening the ecosystem around us, and we sought regeneration instead of maximum profit? The third one is from a mindset of linear, which in many cases in our world today, we take things out of the earth, we use them for, on average, about 5 minutes, and then we throw them in a landfill or throw them in the ocean. We take things and we toss them away. And so we propose moving from a linear system to a circular system where things stay in a closed loop. This could go for money in communities, for the material that products are made out of, and for energetic exchange with people in service businesses. And for whom? So instead of just servicing our customers, what if we said, instead of the customer is king, that people are queen? All of the people in my ecosystem are important and matter, not just my customer. And then for how do we do this? Instead of a static business model, okay, I'm making this widget and for the next 20 years, I'm gonna make this widget. We have to stay as evolving business models that can adapt and change over time. And I think this year points to the necessity for that, if nothing else. Moving from a silo lens to a systems lens. So instead of, again, just focusing on one thing that I do, we have to see the world in interconnected system lenses to really be able to impact that. And then moving from control, meaning I have this one thing that I sell to this person and do it better than anybody else. But what if we move to a distributed model? And I think some beautiful examples of this are Etsy, which I know you'll be training on. But Etsy said, instead of us making handicrafts or artisan things and trying to sell them as much as possible, what if we created a platform, a distributed platform for artisans and makers all over the world to help empower them? And we've seen how successful Etsy is and how much they've empowered people all over the world. They didn't try to control everything. They allowed it to open up and become a platform for much more. And then how much, and I work a lot with startups and big businesses, and so they're often thinking about infinite scale. I want to grow as big as possible, as fast as possible. But we really want to question this and ask, what does intentional scale look like? Can I run a successful business with 5 people doing $500,000 a year in sales and pay everybody $100,000? Like, you know, that's a really amazing, successful business, or a $2 million business, or a $5 million business. We don't need to have billion-dollar companies, and we don't have to always be going for that, because when that is our North Star, things get warped. And so what could intentional scale look like for entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups, and even big businesses? And the last two, with whom? So instead of thinking about competition of I have to do better than anybody else, what about coalition and collaboration? Because if there's actually a problem we're solving, water crisis, climate crisis, pandemic, racial injustice, income inequality, these are problems worth solving. Why do I want to solve that alone? It's not worth solving that alone. And so we're going to have to, it's going to take so many more than just one great idea. It's going to take lots of ideas and lots of people working on that. And so one of the things we do is help build coalitions and collaborations and cohorts that focus on certain issues in certain areas and bring people together to actually share knowledge, share ideas, share success stories, share failures, and advance much faster. And then finally, to what end? Instead of market dominance, meaning I'm going to take up 10% market share, 50% market share, and I'm going to control this market, we ask, what about market capacity building? So actually building capacity in your market to do more. And one example of this is when I just graduated college, I was starting a car sharing company in Nashville, Tennessee, writing a business plan for it. And I actually traveled to New York and Portland and visited other car sharing companies that already existed. And one of the things they told me was, I was like, aren't you scared to share your information with me and tell me what you've learned? And they said, no, because in this new space, the more car sharing companies there are, the more normal it becomes, the more it lifts the entire industry, the more it builds the capacity of all of us to help people reduce their impact on the planet and share cars. And it was coming out of business classes where we were told to dominate the market and be competitive. It really opened up my eyes to a new way of thinking about how to elevate an entire space, an entire group of people, and that all of those people could do better together. And then what I'll close on is this, thinking about living in a small rural town and thinking about the 3 horizons that I shared at the beginning. And thinking about that over those years, these towns have shipped away, have exported value for the longest periods of time. They've been on the very transactional type of mentality, and they've shipped things away. And so what's left in a lot of these small towns is not much. But if we come back to a regenerative mindset and we say, what would be possible in a small town, a small community, a rural community, I think there's a lot of exciting things that could be. And so, for example, right now, I know a lot of us, we're on the internet, we pay Charter or Spectrum, and they give me shitty internet service. I pay them $70 a month, and there's nothing I can do about it. But what if we had a community-owned internet company that kept that money circulating in the community and provided better service? Or what if we had a community-owned solar farm that, instead of shipping my money away to a massive corporation that I don't ever get to see for dirty energy, what if we built a community-owned solar farm and that money circulated right here in our community, and we provided our own clean energy? Or what if, instead of putting my money in a CD or a savings account with Wells Fargo, who's building access pipelines, what if we had a community-focused finance model where I earn 2 or 3% investing in local businesses instead of the 1% in my Wells Fargo account, and we kept that money circulating in our local economy? And so I think there are a lot of opportunities to think about the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years. And as a business owner, I would be asking myself, what are the biggest challenges that my community is going to be facing over the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years? And if I can solve them, and if I can bring together people to solve them, I believe your business has a strong chance of being really, really, really successful too, for you and for your family and for your dreams. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I think we have a massive opportunity to rethink what business could look like. And while we're all, working hard and having fun and doing the things we love, we also get to regenerate our planet and our communities at the same time. So I will stop there and say thanks again for everyone for being here, and we'll open it up to some questions.
Yeah, we do want to take the last few moments to open to questions. We always end this way, and you can raise your hand, you can put it in chat. If you say in chat that you have a question, Leanne can make sure you're unmuted and that your video's open. So please do that. And kind of to tee things up, I've been listening to all our presenters today and trying to think of questions about voice. But I keep coming back to, with all the noise, with COVID and with wildfires and hurricanes and social injustice, and then you add a volatile political election into that. And it's interesting, working with Heather, I feel very unsafe at this point. She talked about a lot of women have that feeling at this point because there's so much out of our control. I think small businesses are just trying to figure out how to get back to normal. And the fact is, back to normal probably won't happen, certainly anytime soon. And I think with Adrian, your message, that this is a beautiful time to rethink, to innovate, to inspire new business models and new collaborative measures. So my question to each of you, because we have to tie it back to voice, I'll start with Adrian and then go to you, Heather, is using your voice, and obviously you just made this presentation, what would be your advice to everyone about moving forward? Is it a topic that you talked about? Where do you see the hope in this chaos?
Bringing it back to voice, the hope I see is that each of us is uniquely gifted and talented and passionate, and every single person has a role to play, and we have a unique role to play. And I believe all of us in our hearts are good people. We care about others. We care about the communities we live in. And so I think just trying to really embody that, that's been a lot of my own work over the last couple of years, is how do I embody what I can do that brings me joy and energy and serves the world in the ways that I want to serve the world, and just find that and do that, and really find what brings you alive, and keep moving towards that. And I believe the more people that do that, the more people that feel authentically fueled by the work they do, I think the better off our world is going to become, just naturally.
Heather.
Where's the hope? I think that's exactly right. I think it is that each of us really does have that true voice that is unique. It's not just the same as everybody else. Personality is, a dime a dozen. We can all clash with each other. But that sense when we drop below what that initial knee-jerk reaction is listening to the way out of no way. That space that comes up with the answers that we think only those really amazing people come up with. Well, they started somewhere. They started with listening to what they're called to do, and going with what makes you feel alive is a really great place to go for what you're, called to do. Not everybody has their basic needs met. So that's a really, that is speaking from a place of privilege, for sure. Because if you know anything about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you don't have food, if you don't have shelter, trying to listen to that true voice may be more challenging, more important than ever, of course, because it will help you make choices that can keep you alive. But that true voice is unique. And I think it is there. Anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling like, how in the world are we ever, is this the end times? Everybody keeps talking about that, whether jokingly or seriously. What I come back to is all of the people who have the solutions locked inside of them right now. They're here. They're here. We are here. And listening to that true voice, we're going to hear our piece of the puzzle. We're going to hear what we can do with the privilege that we do have to listen to that deeper sense of voice, to feel what does bring us alive. And if we can stay in that simpler place rather than being so focused on consumption, which, as Adrian just showed us, like, we're running out of that, folks. We're running out of living in that way. So we have to be more regenerative in our thinking. We have to look for these new ways, and listening to our true voice is where we're going to find that. But never fear, there are people listening all over the planet, and there is a way through.
So we actually are getting close to the end of the session, and we don't have questions. So I'm going to go back to Adrian and then Heather. What would be your kind of closing message to this session?
Heather, you can go first.
Okay, so I know I mentioned the breathe, drop in, listen, and respond, but I have a 3-word mantra that I love, and it is to pause, breathe, respond. And it really is simple. We make things much more complex. If we just drop in, we can hear that simplicity. So I wish that for all of us, to pause, breathe, and respond. And I wish you all very well. Thank you for being here.
So the thing that came to mind for me, closing message, is I have a small mantra for myself that's go for flow, meaning like flow state, the thing that makes you come alive. Go for that. Always go for that. Go for flow. Find the others, meaning the people who are supporting you, working on the things that you're working on, who can lift you up, and you're going to die. So just a subtle reminder that, this is not forever. And I really want to spend my life doing things that I love and am passionate about, and experience as much gratitude as possible while doing that work. And so go for flow, find the others, and you are going to die.
Thank you both. I got tears in my eyes again. What's that about? I'd like to go ahead and close out with the next slide. we have only 2 more forum series left. The next one is The Art of Storytelling, and it's October 18th. And this one should be very interesting. Catherine Yassari is a journalist and a storyteller. She's been featured on Oprah and does all sorts of National Geographic films. She really is a storyteller artist. So she will be sharing her processes. And then Heather, who's always in my head because I hired her to be so, talks about the stories we tell ourselves, because we always are limited to our internal mind, our monkey mind, and the stories we tell ourselves. So she'll talk you through how to overcome some of those stories. And then Lori Benson, who's actually on the border as we speak, is working on 100 Voices project. It's about stories of the elders, the Native American. But also, I'm sure she'll bring some other projects from being on the border as we speak. So please join us for that session. And then last slide. We end November 16th with Janessa Gans Wilder, and she is with the Euphorides Institute, and we'll talk about new paradigms, because I think we'll have to all admit we're entering a new paradigm. And if we think about Adrian's horizons, I'm sure there'll be one after that as well, but she'll talk about entering into those new paradigms. Delaney Keating, who is the executive director of Startup Colorado, will talk about new paradigm shifts and methodologies for small businesses. And then Jenna Finkston, who has Jala Blue Yoga, but also has gotten into embodiment and into yourself as how you shift yourself into new paradigms. And certainly from the divine feminine perspective. So that will end our forum series for the year. I encourage you to recommend to us speakers for next year and ideas and concepts, or if you'd like to be a panelist, please reach out to me at info@centralmountainsbdc.org. And last slide. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I was so excited about this session, and for us to have last week have technical issues, and we finally did it, and I think we even got this sucker recorded. So thank you both. You were brilliant, and so was Whitney, and thank you all of our wonderful attendees. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Jamie. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.